And then we move to the EFF, which has meanwhile proposed some amendments to the party's policy discussion documents ahead of its third National People's Assembly. The elective conference, which starts tomorrow, will elect a new leadership, including a president and a deputy. Well, tonight we're asking you, what do you think about the prospects of the SACP, the EFF, and certainly the MK Party as they gather and engage with their supporters? Remember to share your views with us via WhatsApp. That number is 072-110-5584. We're taking calls as well. Take down this number, save it on your phone, 010-594-6010. But let's get into the discussion now with our panel. We are joined by Nelson Mandela University senior researcher and political analyst, Dr Ongama Mtimka, joining us via video link. Democracy Works Foundation founder and chair, Professor William Gumede, also with us this evening. Good evening to you, Prof. And Director of the Gender Equality Unit at the University of the Western Cape, an independent socio-economic and political analyst, Dr Fikile Vilakazi-Alberts. Big voices, important analysis that we're hoping to get from our guests this evening. A good evening to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us. There really is so much to talk about, but I think that before we even start to get into the different formations, and perhaps we'll take a bite-sized approach, start with the SACP, then move on to the other parties. But I think just broadly, before we try to get more specific, is it ironic that you do have these parties having these incredibly important events at this time of the year as the country watches, getting themselves ready for 2026, and so many of their policy directions so similar? Prof. Gumede, I'm going to let you have the first bite there.
Afternoon, and thank you for having me on a program. Just apologies, I'm just coming out of flu, so I may not sound as clear. But I mean, I think what's happening is a realignment that's beginning to happen in our politics. I mean, it all started, it's interesting that Bladen Zimandi in his press conference was saying that the Moonshot Pact, or the multi-party charter, was responsible or part responsible in bringing the ANC below 40%. I think that was, for me, that was the beginning actually of our realignment. And the GNU, I think, will actually push our political parties to realign more. And that's what we're seeing, because now what is happening in our politics now, the GNU has actually forced parties to align against and for the GNU. So those inside and then those outside. And those on the outside are predominantly, on the sort of populist left. But it's also within the ANC, it's also realigning the ANC, because within the ANC there's a lot of groups that are opposed to the GNU. And that's why we're seeing the SACP now is going out on its own. So really, I mean, we're witnessing a realignment of our politics right in front of our eyes.
Yeah, Dr. Mtimka, do you agree that this is a realignment of our politics?
So I'd like to look at it more from the internal thinking within the SACP. Yes, on the broader scheme of things, yes, there is this trend of realignment. But I think that the SACP is attempting to augment its position within the alliance by having a consequential stance. So if, for example, they are refusing to do things or support particular motions, the ANC remains unaffected because the SACP doesn't have a tangible base represented in either seats in parliament or in municipalities that it can always threaten to withdraw should things not go according to whatever bargaining position that they want. But what they're missing here is that the time to do that in a consequential way is long gone. When the SACP threatened to leave the alliance, it mattered because there was a need to retain coherence in the ANC, but the reason why the party never really gave effect to that decision, which they've been threatening since 2007, some would argue even 2002, is because, one, they always hedged their bets on ANC presidents whom they thought would be a lot more left-leaning once they get into power. Two, quite frankly, they thought, in my view, about their true prospects and realized that they didn't have enough a support base on their own to make a viable political outcome, from this decision. And I think that them doing it at this time is a very desperate attempt to try and salvage their position of power within the ANC. I doubt that they're going to give effect to it unless they didn't learn from NUMSA's failed Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party experiment that failed. Both, in fact, the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party in the 2019 election, as well as the United Front in the 2016 election. So this has been tried by leftist parties, and they failed dismally to make sure that it's a viable political alternative.
Yeah, Dr. Vilakazi-Alberts, there's always going to be the question around, and we can zone in on the SACP since, of course, Dr. Mtimka has led us that way. There's always going to be the question around how the voter observes what we are seeing in the political landscape. When the SACP, for instance, says they're going to run for the 2026 elections of their own volition, but remain part of the tripartite alliance. Two questions, Dr. Vilakazi-Alberts. The communist, I suppose, and even socialist sort of narrative, does it grab, in your view, the electorate of 2024, 25, 26? And that staying in the tripartite alliance, what does that mean for you?
Naledi, good evening to you and to viewers at home. I think I will take it from the angle of the history of the organizations that we are talking about here. We must just remember why the SACP is aligned with the African National Congress. And we have to go back to 1921, Naledi, and remember that the SACP is an organization that was formed basically with the interest of workers at heart. And it was never really aligned with the values of the African National Congress from the onset. They fought for a period of 20 years, since the formation because of the communist ideals that the SACP believed in and the ANC couldn't. But where they found each other is about 20 years later when they were, when the SACP was banned because of Communism Act in South Africa by the apartheid government, just after 1948, I think in the 50s. And when they were then in exile, this is where they come together because of the pressures of fighting against the apartheid system. And coming back then, fast forwarding to 2024, what that means to the voter now is that I imagine both of them realized that the social contract that has held them together since the days of exile when they were both underground is now in trouble, right? Because of the government of national unity, in a sense that the ideals of a Pan-Africanist arrangement for the nation are dissipating in front of their eyes. The ideals of liberation for South Africans, like simple freedoms for the voter are dissipating. And I think that is what is important for the voter now. The SACP continues, of course, to align itself with the workers. The question is whether that alignment remains with the unions that are aligned with the ANC, like your COSATU and all of them, and which is something that has continued to trouble the SACP. When they did GNU, that was just the last blow, really, for the SACP, in that I think it just took them back to perhaps the 1920s to say, we have been here before with the ANC. We have fought at an ideological level around whether we're going the communist way, the socialist way, or we're going the neoliberal way. And the ANC is back to that place. And I think that has annoyed the SACP very much. And I think you can see it in the conversations that the leadership of SACP has contested with the ANC on the public domain recently. And I think those are the things at stake. Going to conferencing at this point, it's about thinking and reimagining ideological shared values for the people of South Africa and for the voter, and try and align those.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing, when we talk about the messaging of political parties and then whether or not it is believed by the electorate. And that's going to be something that we touch on the other side of this break as we continue this discussion around what the future holds for these three political parties that are having busy days ahead of them. The SACP, of course, seeing its fifth National Congress. You've got the MK Party preparing to celebrate 1 year of existence, as well as the EFF choosing their leadership this weekend. We'll take your calls on 010-594-6010 or send us a WhatsApp 072-110-5584. We continue after this. Still watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition with myself, Naledi Malone. We continue our conversation around what three important political parties are looking like in the days that come. Some of the points certainly that we've heard from them, for instance, the MK Party inviting the EFF to its one-year anniversary celebration. You've got the EFF saying that they are preparing for conference, but who will lead the party? And then the SACP saying they will run for the elections on their own, but they remain within the tripartite alliance with the ANC and COSATU. What does the future hold in your view, if you were to perhaps throw the proverbial bones as a voter? What the future looks like for these three parties? Send us a WhatsApp on 072-110-5584. We've got a caller on the line, Marcus Mahlangu in Pretoria. Marcus, good evening to you. Thank you so much for calling. What are your thoughts on our discussion?
Evening, how are you, man?
Well, sir, what are your thoughts?
Yes, you see, my challenge is one with this so-called South African Communist Party. I really do not know whether this is a really South African Communist Party that which some of us understand. Because if you can remember, if you take into cognizance of what is it that the former South African Communist Party, Blade Nzimande, has done to and as far as and all these other wrongs that which he was alleged to be doing. Then now we are very much surprised, these people, when they are saying that they now need to separate. When upon their separations, they do not mention the wrongdoings that which their former Secretary General has been doing. You see, this is something that which has been happening for quite some time, where South African Communist Party at all material times, when they are not in good terms or they are at loggerheads with the African National Congress, they decide, they tell the whole nation that they are going to campaign alone. But then when the time of elections arrives, then now we are being campaigned and we are being told that people must vote for the African National Congress and all of that. So I just want to indicate to you that we are in an actual fed up with this Communist Party. According to me, I wish that the people could understand the manner in which I understand this community party thing, so that they will just get rid of all this nonsense and perhaps begin to look into another party that which would perhaps serve their own interest, because these communists, they are serving their own personal interest.
Okay, Marcus, thank you so much for calling. Strong points there, Marcus Mahlangu calling in from Pretoria. And Professor Gumede, perhaps I bring that one to you as we zone in a little bit on the SACP. This is mixed messaging. This is what Marcus is saying. I mean, you've got the party staying in the tripartite alliance, but saying they're going to run on their own. They've spoken out against the government of national unity and saying that the GNU recolonizes the country, but they support their chairperson being part of the GNU. What do you make of that?
I agree with the speaker. Because, I mean, it's mixed messages. SACP will have to be clear. I mean, if he wants to go on its own, he can't say, well, one foot in and one foot out. This is not a time, this is not a moment in our politics. I mean, this is the moment where your parties clearly differentiate themselves. I mean, as you know, MK has differentiated himself, EFF has differentiated himself. I mean, there's no room for muddling in politics anymore, and so on. Because, they're already struggling. The SACP has a credibility problem. I mean, firstly, they were part of, the state capture project, is that they supported former President Jacob Zuma, that heralded in the state capture project. That was the start of, they brought the ANC actually down. The long decline of the ANC started there, and it brought the ANC at the last, May elections to 39.7%. So they were part and parcel of that. They haven't apologized. They need to apologize for being a part of their project. That's the first thing that they need to do to regain their credibility. Secondly, if they want to secure credibility, they have to resign en masse from the GNU. Bladen Nzimande, Gwede Mantashe, he was a former chairperson of the SACP, the two deputy ministers, deputy finance minister, there's Buti, who was also a deputy minister. They must resign en masse, and then they must conform the party. When I started earlier on to say this, we in the beginning of the realignment of our politics. Now is the end of the liberation era of our politics. The liberation era was the era where people supported the ANC and the ANC's alliance based on the past, not based on the present. So there's a fundamental shift in our politics because of that, and that forces a realignment of politics. New political parties have been formed, and many new ones will be formed, and we're very, very likely even to see MK splitting in the future. Even the EFF may be splitting in the future. So we are entering a period of uncertainty and for a lot of more splinters. If you think about it, a lot of sort of splinters, not only from the ANC, but also, for example, the DA that we've seen splinters before. So we're going to see that until our politics get to a new equilibrium, and so on. And I think the SACP has waited for too long to go it alone. MK and the EFF has taken their ground. Already, we've seen it. When, for example, the NUMSA example was made, when NUMSA tried their party, it was an absolute embarrassment. And I think the SACP is going to go the same. That is why they are actually giving a mixed message. They almost want to be like former President Jacob Zuma. They want to be a member of the ANC at the same time while they're independent. And that way they're hoping, they may then still bring in some ANC support if they position themselves that way.
Sure. Prof, I'm thinking about how you say the SACP has failed to define itself. I think that's actually the word, to define itself as much as the MK Party, for instance, is doing. And Ongama, I'll bring it to you when we can get into the MK Party. My goodness, there's so much to talk about. There's, of course, the fracas in terms of, the public spat, what the EFF says about the MK Party. But the MK Party, as it prepares to celebrate 1 year of its existence, then says, we've invited the EFF to the 1 year celebration. What do you make of that? ATM says, we'll be there.
Did you say the EFF say they will be there?
I need to get that right. That is not a mistake we can afford to make. The ATM, Dr. Mtimka, is saying they will be in attendance.
Okay, sure. I think that's a cheeky move on the part of the MK Party. It's part of playing these games of, positioning themselves as the elder brother, as the party where all these other parties should be collapsed into. So it's part of that strategy, in my view. And I don't think it's going to land well with the EFF leadership. They've taken exception to the attempts by MK Party to, dislodge the EFF from its position. They did during the elections, but now what they're doing is they want to cement that positioning even in public discourse. So I don't think it's going to fly well. But I think what we need to note here, Naledi, is that the MK Party have done fairly well for themselves within a year of formation. And in my view, national elections, when you have got a national profile, and there's debate about the extent of that national profile, are the best platform to launch a political party. Because in my view, unlike local government elections, you hear the popular appeal is what counts, unlike of the party brand itself. Unlike in local government, where generally you leverage the popularity also of leaders who come from specific wards. So the MK Party, I think, have done very well for themselves. They achieved success which only could have come from the fact that it's a former president in the democratic period that they are associated with. Never mind who, but the fact that a former president endorsed a new splinter formation is something that was new in South Africa. Remember, former President Mbeki is alleged to have faced a similar dilemma, and he chose his legacy. He chose, to remain silent and not openly support. I mean, if he had openly supported COPE, we could have seen much more traction for that party. Now, President Zuma has gone ahead and done that, and we have seen what happens from his experiment. When a politician who has commanded following and has been a former president starts a party, and this is why, by the way, going back to the SACP, I argue that they have nothing to offer as far as, popular leaders. Yes, the Blade Nzimandes and others have been popular, but among elite of workers, for example, among the worker elites, truly speaking, they haven't really been popular movements of the people who can claim their own significant share of the ANC support base that they threaten to take away by going it alone.
Some of the analysis that I have seen where the MK Party is concerned, Dr. Vilakazi-Alberts, is that, sure, they did well in the 2024 elections. I mean, Dr. Mtimka, they're saying it twice in his response. But of course, the question is going to be whether or not the numbers at the polls have translated to power, bargaining power, and will they get there if you feel that perhaps they have not gained that, Dr. Vilakazi-Alberts?
Naledi and South Africans, the symbolism of Umkhonto weSizwe in the political system at the moment is quite a fragile one, in that I think the votes of 2024 that have gone to Umkhonto weSizwe needs to be analyzed in a decisive manner, in that we need to ask ourselves, what did the voter actually vote for? And I really keep going back to this. Did they vote for the persona, or did they vote for the retaining of a particular democratic dispensation? Did they vote for the retainment of the imagination of a national democratic revolution or not? And I'm saying this in simple terms to say South Africans keep voting and looking for an alternative that says we are not going to return to apartheid governance, we are not going to return to colonial governance, and we would then vote for whatever that looks like it's taking us away from there. And with the disillusionment, from the ANC, of course, a number of voters started moving towards the EFF and the consolidation of the Black Party progressive forces prior to the 2024 elections, was hoping that the EFF would be that leader. But Udokotela Mtimka puts it so well. The elder brother syndrome kicked in there to say, is it the EFF or Umkhonto weSizwe? And clearly the elder brother has won and has managed to convince everybody else to say, let us organize ourselves as a Black progressive party in the form of what is emerged now to be Umkhonto weSizwe. Whether that is going to last in our imagination in the political system or not is something that we need to test in 2026. And 2029, and hopefully, Naledi, it is not based on the persona, it is not based on the charisma of what I call umsholozism, but it's based on the real ideals of attaining the national democratic revolution and attaining a particular relevance in terms of maintenance of the democratic revolution that we are all waging. So for me, that is what is at stake here. And I think the voter becomes critical because the voter now is really paranoid around the government of national unity to say, we almost had the Democratic Alliance as our deputy president. For instance, what would that have meant for us in 2029? We probably would have had a president that comes from the DA. And I think that is the paranoia that you are seeing then that votes the MK. And I will stop here because we have colleagues, but this is something that was written by a cadre within the ANC. There's a paper on this. I think it was written by Supra Mahumapel at one of the policy conferences of the ANC, when he wrote a policy direction to say to the ANC, let us be the first ones to consolidate the black political parties, the Pan-Africanist parties, including AZAPO, SA, all the black party, that fought during the liberation struggle. Unfortunately, it didn't happen because of the divisions within the ANC. I think people didn't want to listen to Supra for whatever reason. Yeah. But it comes from there.
Yeah, we're going to take some WhatsApps on the other side of this break. But Dr. Vilakazi-Alberts, you talk about, well, we await to see what 2026 holds for these parties. But I've made the argument many times that while 2026 perhaps sounds like a long time, it really isn't when you consider the fact that we are coming to the end of 2024, certainly in 2025. The race towards those local government elections does then start. And so tonight, a litmus test of what the electorate possibly could say in that election. We'll take a look at those WhatsApps on the other side of this break. Stay with us. We continue our discussion here on Newsfeed PM as we discuss what the future holds for three political parties. The South African Communist Party that says it's going to run for the 2026 local government elections on its own, but staying in the tripartite alliance. The EFF that chooses its leadership in the days coming. Meanwhile, the MK Party celebrates 1 year of existence. Have they done well? What are your views of how they'll fare? Have they impressed you coming up in the 2026 elections? Have they spoken the right words? We take a look at those WhatsApps. 072-110-5584. Apostle has sent a WhatsApp this evening saying, hi, Naledi, there is no prospect of success in these all three organizations. It's just greed, power hungry, and corruption. Okay, Apostle, thank you so much for sending in that WhatsApp. Anonymous says the move to contest elections by SACP will dilute the political landscape, and the emergence of a DA and Freedom Front Plus can't be overruled. The MKP emergence has weakened the essence of political involvement and will lead to the third change of political diaspora and its authenticity. Okay, Anonymous, thanks for that. Manu says EFF is a cult movement with no future. Pro-Malema, MK will not survive beyond Zuma, and SACP will suffocate without ANC. Well, they're staying in the tripartite alliance, Manu. And of course, we continue with our panel. Manu says there, and I'll come back to you, Dr. Vilakazi-Alberts. Manu says that the EFF is a cult movement, and perhaps tongue-in-cheek, but once they come out of conference, who do you think will be the president of the EFF?
That's a very, very difficult one, a dicey situation in Naledi and South Africans, in that I think there's a power struggle that's going on there. Clearly, there is a move towards Dr. Undlozi to take up the ranks of the presidency, but also the adamant Commander-in-Chief Julius Malema, wants to retain power. And I'm reading that there's just deep-seated frustration and impatience from the voters of the EFF, who are largely young people who want to see change and who want to see democracy within the institutions of the EFF itself. And I think if the numbers have to play anything and mean anything, I have a feeling that Dr. Undlozi is going to rise into the position either of the president or the deputy president of the EFF because of the demands that are coming up from the votership of the EFF, Naledi.
That's very interesting that you put that idea forward, right? Because then I wonder what that would mean. You've got, of course, branches also looking at the likes of Marshall, Dlamini Godrich Gadi, and Vuyani Pambo for some of the leadership spots in the economic freedom fighters. And Dr. Mtimka, perhaps you can talk to us about what you make of that. But there's also the issue of strategy. We've all watched in wonder in the months that have passed, just the bleeding of some of their members heading over into other political parties, for the most part, the MK Party. From a strategy point of view, what needs to be top of mind for the EFF when they sit down together?
Thank you, Naledi. So my parting shot on this is that there are two aspects that the EFF has got to respond in a strategic way to. The first is, as Dr. Vilakazi mentions, around how to respond to the popular calls within the party for particular leaders to arise. And Julius Malema's a dominant faction so far, maybe until the last 2 weeks, had been responding with anger against some of these agitations for some of the leaders to arise. And reading Dr. Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, for example. I'm not sure to what extent will his coming around in the last 2 weeks translate to going to this conference with a view to actually be mending the politics within his party to come up with a unified, a slate that's going to lead the EFF going forward. If they fail to do that, there's a lot of internal people that are already aggrieved by the manner in which Julius Malema was poking people in the eye and saying, daring leaders to leave. Then the second issue around strategy is how do they respond to the rise of the MK Party as well as the continuing role of the ANC. This is something which they can no longer take for granted, that their founding manifesto still offers an answer. I think that they've got to come up from this election, whether with a view, with a strategy that says they're going to differentiate themselves by coming closer to the center, but still remaining the center-left orientation, or in fact retain their offering. But I think that it's not going to work going forward, because there's MK Party that challenges their core as far as, advancing radical politics is concerned.
Professor Gumede, I wonder though if the EFF does have this pro in their arsenal, that they are certainly conversation starters, right? I mean, today, a lot of the discussion being around, the EFF looking at a new Afrikaans song to replace DStem. It's provocative. People want to talk about it. The EFF being really outspoken and saying that the president needs to be more decisive and not be so vague around the arrest warrant of Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. So is that a power that the EFF still has?
The EFF and MK essentially both parties are actually systemically vulnerable. Now, the way political parties are sustainable is when you have your first leadership change successfully, there is, then you consolidate a party. Now, neither MK or the EFF has done that, which means, when an election comes, which actually a competition comes, or when a leader dies or leave or is incapacitated, the parties will collapse. So that is the one thing, the inherent structural vulnerability of both these two parties. Now, in terms of strategy from the EFF's problem, and it's also the MK's problem, that both of these two parties are left populists. They're not leftist parties. I mean, the Communist Party, the SACP is a left party. The other two are left populist parties. So there is a little bit of a room for maneuver for the SACP to remain, sort of, when I say a left, on the left, really, because the mainstream, what people think and younger people look as the left in South Africa is actually populist parties. MK is a populist party. Yeah. The EFF is a populist party, but populist parties after left. Now, can the EFF, for example, their only option really is to merge or to combine in a coalition with the MK for a long term, and that would be a populist left coalition, or to begin to negotiate with the SACP and then move to a proper left without the populism. And then the problem for strategy of the SACP itself, all of the communist parties of the families of the SACP have all modernized. The Vietnam Communist Party is now a party of capitalism. The Chinese Communist Party accepted the market. The Italian Communist Party, the French Communist Party. So all of the parties in the family of left communist parties have all changed, and some have even changed their names. So maybe the SACP should look at, from a strategy point of view, of changing its name to set its skin, to try to compete, on the center left. But I think, although having said that, Clearly, for populism in South Africa, there is about a third of South Africa's population will vote for populists.
Yeah.
So between the MK and the EFF, there is about a 25% to a 30% potential market for that group. If one look at the current voters, the people who've actually turned up to vote, I mean, obviously there is millions of other voters who didn't pitch up to vote because they don't think the political parties that we have right now caters for them. But that really is, where current politics are.
Yeah, very interesting, Prof. Thank you so much for that. Dr. Fikile Alberts, perhaps I want to give you the last bite in this discussion. Professor Gumede, they're talking about what the future might possibly hold for all of these parties. And you got to think about pre-May 2024, months before, perhaps even a year before. If you had spoken to the electorate, many people do not expect to see an ANC-DA agreement, and yet here we are. So even as these parties go about their own work of defining themselves and planning their own future, who do you likely see holding hands in 2026?
I tend to agree with Professor Gumede about the possible alignment of the EFF and South African Communist Party. There are so many things in common, and there are so many opportunities arising for them on the public space and in the political system. They are both wearing red shirts, and I think that puts them together. They are leftist, and so they won't struggle with issues of identity. And there's an opportunity of the patrol or the deportation of Yanusis Walus. And I think it's something that probably has angered both of them, in a sense that it messes up with the meaning and the symbolism of Ukrisani in the memory of our political system. And I think it's something that will bind them together in terms of using that deportation and that parole as a galvanizing force to remind South Africans what actually does Krisani mean to us as a body politic. And then the third, the opportunity is that of Russia. The SACP is born out of the workers' struggle, the Bolsheviks party in the 20s in Russia, right, led by Vladimir Lenin at that time. And I think it's something that binds them together at an ideological level. And the fact that Russia is where it is located currently in the body politic, in the global space, also fighting for those ideals, as EFF believes really in alignment with Russia. Yeah. The SACP does as well. And I think those are things that will put them together. Naledi, there's so much that they can. So that's what I see. Yeah.
We could talk for a very long time, and I imagine this conversation will continue well into 2026, but it's going to be a busy few days for those parties, and certainly an interesting year and a half as we get closer and closer to the 2026 local government elections. You're watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition. We're back in a moment.